It's a bit provocative, this title, because modern slavery is a contested term, but it actually goes back quite a few years in time, and it's really about what's happened when you try to conduct business, yet find yourself promoting, supporting, or not putting obstacles in the way of exploitation of humans. So the project was only started half a year ago with the help of a bank. We need not name that one. But it's about trying to find out what the impact of various types of activities, and including policies and safeguards and measures that the financial institution might engage in. So the background is this, that we do have people at risk, and one category that is particularly at risk are migrant workers. For a variety of reasons, they might find themselves coerced into things that they would not do voluntarily, even though it might be the case that they've been lured by promises of various sorts in terms of incomes, better working conditions, ability to bring their families, etc. Yet, at the end of the day, they find themselves in a very different situation. This is the short story about labor exploitation. And to give you a formal definition of this, we'll actually go back to the 1930s, where the ILO's Convention on Forced Labor stated that modern slavery in the workplace is, quote, all work or service extracted from any person under the threat of a penalty for which the person has not offered himself voluntarily. Well, you notice the gendered language here if you're from the 1930s, and but it actually didn't change even in the update of this in 2014. So any person might be a threat. The project is run by Lynn Leopold, sitting here in the middle, our newly recruited postdoc, Sarah Philipson Isak, who is a sociologist from the University of Gothenburg, and then myself. And with great help from the bank in question. Now, the reason why we look at these things, this one we got a bit scrambled, I guess, when I imported, is that there is an assessment on where the greatest risks are, because modern slavery is not a phenomenon limited to the global south, as many of us might think. Actually, the incidence of modern slavery in this, under this definition is actually as prevalent in a certain class of high-income countries as it is in the poorest countries. Those are those that are depending on raw materials. Think of the Gulf states, Russia, and a few others. But also those high-income countries that do not rely on that kind of sources, but are a more traditional, mature industrial state, perhaps of a welfare state type, like the Scandinavian ones, which have the lowest incidence, or so it's believed, still have several persons at risk. So, for instance, the ILO suggests that in Sweden it would be about 6,000 people that are at risk. We think there might be reasons to question this, because that was the figure that was reported by the Red Cross already 30 years ago, and things haven't improved necessarily since then. But what we do see is that it's the sector where we have the greatest risk is actually in construction. So building construction, infrastructure, housing, commercial properties, whatever have you. And this is where the banks come in, because they do a high exposure to this sector one way or another. So it's through various forms of lending activities, both to developers, to real estate developers, but also to individual households in the form of mortgages and such like. Banks also engage in investments of various sorts, which again, to some degree, targets building, construction, and real estate. They do so with their own funds, but on behalf of customers of various sorts, so as asset managers and so on. And we could also add that they don't have their own facilities, So the office space and such things that they use. And if we go back 10, 15 years, actually that was where the focus was in order to avoid both environmental impacts but also social sustainability issues, was own facilities, own employees. Today, the focus has shifted to customers, suppliers, and society at large. Now, banks, of course, are very, very aware of this, and so 4 years ago, there was an initiative launched by the 6 largest banks in Sweden, which is known as the Bankinitiativet, or Bankinitiativet Hållbart Byggande, Hållbar Byggbransch, and which on the opposite side have 2 industry associations, Byggherrarna or Byggföretagen. These are essentially the developers and the construction companies. And half a year ago, they came to an agreement where they set out specific requirements for suppliers in particular, because we do have a very tiered structure, particularly in building construction. It's not a new thing. We've had this system for about 100 years in Sweden. Only that has become more pronounced with the higher level of outsourcing of activities. Now, one of the reasons why outsourcing looks the way it does in construction is that construction takes place where the building is supposed to be. You can't offshore it. And this was true of all the industries actually on the graph. These are industries where you can't move the service or activity or production to another country. It's got to be where the consumers are, which makes it quite different from manufacturing. And this is also why many of the practices that we do see and we do associate with the global south because of the offshoring are moving back into mature industrialized economies. Essentially, it's the same kind of processes that we saw with manufacturing starting some 30 years on a grand scale, only that it targets a different set of industries and activities. Now, this Bankinitiativet has been amended on part of one of the industry associations, that they have also included a supplementary contract for suppliers, one that, unlike Bankinitiativet in itself, also includes sanctions, levies, the cancelling of contracts and such things. We are yet to see whether this works out, but this is the background to the thing that we are going to look at. So what we want to do under this project is to explore the integration of human rights due diligence in the practices of one of these banks behind this initiative, and see how, to what extent financial market actors can actually mitigate the risk of labor exploitation in various ways, and where money is active from the banks or services from the banks are actively involved. And we would want to see whether or not banks have a direct or indirect impact on improving the situation. So this is where we start out. It's very much, I should say, there's a considerable amount of groping in the dark here, because the causal chain is not self-evident. We don't really know exactly how it would work out, other than that money matters. So we wanted to look at these on light what the policies the banks have, the regulation that exists, both existing and anticipated. And we've seen over the years that some of these banks behind this initiative have scaled up their activities quite dramatically in terms of production of reporting, of policies, of mandates of various sorts. But we don't know whether this flow of documents, if it actually makes a difference. And therefore, we would want also to look at, to engage with the stakeholders here, so both the primary ones and perhaps the secondary ones around it. We all know that we have untold practices in this and other industries. And again, it's not a new thing. We have news reports, we have researchers and others who have been looking at these phenomena for the past 20 to 30 years in Sweden alone. And we haven't seen much by formal action. but to the extent that there is, we want to see what it might work out. So the potential contribution of the project, we think, is that we could perhaps identify the type of bank policies or nature of bank policies on social sustainability issues that do translate into real impact. And so there's some kind of impact modeling here to find out what works and what does not work, quite simply. Research-wise, we would want to add to the existing literature on modern slavery as a management practice. Thank you.